Okay, so welcome back to another episode, another session related with the history of Peru, related with the culture of Peru. And today, Marek and I, we are going to be explaining and discussing with you two very important immigrations to this nation. We're going to be talking about the Japanese immigration and
the Polish immigration.
So we're going to be talking about the importance of both immigrations and also how much they have impacted in our society over years, over hundreds of years in some cases. So we're going to start now, and I'm going to be, as usual, sharing some images and a slideshow to give you better info about all of this discussed today. Okay, so let's start. I'm going to be sharing some pictures. And it's going to be also very special for us because we are going to be talking about not just the Japanese influence, which is also very meaningful to Peruvians in many different senses, also because we will talk about the Polish immigration, and Marek is half Polish, half Peruvian. His heart is torn in two. So we will put also lots of heart to this explanation. So, okay, first, let's start with the history of the Japanese immigration. I'm going to be also share with you some notes I have with me, especially about numbers, let's say years, also to make this very, very precise. Well, first of all, when we think in Peru about the Japanese people, one of the first things that come to our mind is, for example, food. Japanese community, which is so important and also so big in the country in terms of numbers. The Japanese community of Peru is the second biggest of Latin America. The biggest one is located in Brazil. So we think, for example, in the influence of the Peruvian Japanese food that we call also Nikkei food, which is pretty much everywhere around the world. Or we also think in the Peruvian president Fujimori, a very important personality, loved and hate at the same time. So, but the Japanese history started long ago. And well, the Japanese history of immigration to Peru and the Chinese history of the immigration of Chinese to Peru are quite alike in terms of, first of all, well, we have involved a long trip, from Asia to Peru. We have also involved contracts of workers, in this case Japanese workers, wanted to come to this nation to make a living, to work in plantation fields. Also something similar in the case of the Chinese, but the terms of the contracts of the Japanese were much more fair. And this is because, well, Peru had already let's say cheated the Chinese men about 50 years before of the influx of the Japanese, mistreating them, almost treating them like slaves. That was around the 1850s, 1860s. So there was a very bad, let's say, reputation of Peru back in the ending of the 19th century. So Peru had to, clean a little bit our name as a nation, and the contracts were much more, let's say, taken care of. So in the case of the Chinese, for example, when they came to Peru, they were forced to sign up contracts that sometimes tie them to their masters for almost 10 years in some cases. But in the case of the Japanese, only 4 years, right? The payments were much better. And in most of the cases, the Japanese people came in family groups, not like the Chinese, which were mainly men only. And they were, well, coming with the desires of making a living and returning home, and most of them never returned. But they had family that they left in their homeland. In the case of the Japanese came in family groups. So this is an image of the Sakura Maru, which was the ship that took the first group of Japanese men to Peru in the year 1899. And the first group was a group of 790 Japanese that reached the country. Most of their contracts took them to the sugarcane plantations of the coast of Peru and also the cotton plantations of the coast of Peru. So most of the Japanese who came to Peru in the first wave of immigration came from Okinawa. Which Okinawa is not in the continent, basically, of Japan, is basically an island. It's in the south part, very, very far away. And most actually of the descendants of Japanese that live in Peru, in this moment, third, fourth, even fifth generation, are descendants of Okinawan people. But also, some of the Japanese who came here were from Osaka, from Kanagawa, from Hokkaido, from Hiroshima. These are some of the sites which are actually very, very spread over the territory of Japan. But the reason why these people were coming to Peru during the early 20th century especially, is because, first of all, a problem of demographics. There was an explosion of the population, let's say, of Japan back then. There were no opportunities for peasants, especially for farmers. So they needed to leave Japan in order to make a better future for themselves and their children. So when the Japanese came here, one of the things I like about, well, the way how they, let's say, treated their mates, their let's say, people from their same country, they started to organize in let's say, cooperatives. Also, immediately after they came, they started to also create schools. And there were actually several schools. Before Second World War, there were 27 schools here in Peru, let's say, oriented to the Japanese children or run by Japanese. Things changed after the Second World War. Unfortunately, we're going to be talking about that, especially about the attack of Pearl Harbor. That was a breaking point for Japanese in America in general, in all America. So we are going to talk a little bit more about this later. So this is another picture commemorative of the arrival of the Japanese. You can see also, well, many women, something we cannot see in pictures of the Chinese, for example, in which were men, the ones who came. And this is very important also because at some point, many of these Japanese families, they created sort of like a permaculture. They isolated a little bit from the local traditions, from the Peruvian traditions, because, well, in their houses, they were able to speak their language, to, well, at least try to cook their traditional food, maybe giving it a local twist. Right, but they kept the traditional cuisine as much as they could. Something that didn't happen with the Chinese community, no? So, well, this is something that continued also for many, many decades until pretty much the 1960s, when the community started to open a little bit more. So also another thing important is to mention that the amount of people, of Japanese that came to Peru between, let's say, the year 1899, the arrival of the Sakura Maru, and the 1920s was in total 26,000 Japanese. That was a huge number, actually, of immigrants. But if you remember, there were 100,000 Chinese arriving. I'm trying to compare a little bit because, well, we had our other session dedicated to the Chinese, and later we're going to be discussing about other important immigrations, no? And 20,000 of those immigrants were from Okinawa exclusively. Mm-hmm. Okay. So immediately after the Japanese came, they started not just to form cooperatives or to try to live very close one to another, especially after they were freed of their contracts. They also started to create cemeteries. Also, this is one of the oldest cemeteries we have here in Peru of the Japanese community. This cemetery is located in Supi. This is in the south of the department of Lima. Mm-hmm. And well, many of these Japanese became very prosperous. And one of the reasons, for example, is because, as you know already, we have the second biggest Japanese, let's say, immigration, exactly, community in Latin America. The first one is in Brazil. Also, another thing very important is that we were the first country in Latin America that established diplomatic relations with Japan too. This is another important thing. We even did it before Brazil, right? So the relations with Japan were very, very close, very, very good for many years. And so much that, for example, in this picture, we can see one of the gifts Peru received from a, let's say, a immigration group from a community during the celebrations of the first 100 years of the independence of Peru. So the independence of Peru was proclaimed in the year 1821. And in the year 1921, Peru made a huge party. We invited people from all over the world, presidents from all over the world. Even the king was invited, the king of Spain, couldn't assist, but he sent also a representative. And the communities that were here, the prosperous communities that were here in Peru, like for example, the Japanese, decided to make presents to Peru to commemorate this important event. So the Japanese community raised funds to make a statue for us dedicated to Manco Cápac. This statue still exists nowadays. It's located in the district of La Victoria. And this is a very interesting, like a very symbolic, let's say, representation, because Japan is the nation of the rising sun, right? And the Incas were the children of the sun, right? So we have this connection. That's also one of the reasons why they chosen, Manco Cápac. And also, Manco Cápac is pointing out in direction to Japan. So it's very, very special, very meaningful, the representation and what it means actually for us and for the community, this representation of Manco Cápac, which is very important also because it's the only representation made to the Incas during the celebration of the first 100 years of the independence of Peru. See, so I think they nail it, right? Because all of the rest of the representations were related well with the colonial times or basically with the modern times, but they commemorated our past, our glorious past. And now I would like to talk about, well, the Second World War and the unfortunate events that happened after, especially the attack of Pearl Harbor, when the United States broke relations with Japan, and Peru was a country pro the United States. We were basically, and still are, very protective of the, let's say, the interests of the United States. So when this happened, immediately after, Peru started to make certain decisions that were xenophobic against the Japanese. And there was also a certain xenophobic feeling, discriminatory feeling against Japanese since a little bit before. One of the reasons is because many of these Japanese people were very prosperous, thanks to, for example, the pandero system, which is a way they have created to, like, for example, reunite money, right, of some people. You know, you give money also, no? And this money is going to be lended to you, distributed, right? And every month you're going to be given the return, like, let's say for a space of 12 months, for example. Everybody will do that. So if you need to buy a car, for example, but you don't have the money cash in this moment, so all of this big group of people will lend you the money, and you will have to return that money in a space of time. And next month, all that money reunited will help another person. So that is the pandero. That's a system used in Japan. So this system also helped many Japanese to become very prosperous, to build businesses, or to build restaurants. No? But Second World War came, and these xenophobic feelings, these feelings of, let's say, we call revanchistas, which means feeling certain, you know, like animosity against a specific group, well, arose, right? So, well, during the month of May of 1940, there were many attacks against the businesses of Japanese people. Over 600 people, Japanese people, were affected directly. Like, for example, their stores broken, or properties, houses, and more than a half of those men were not able to save any money they had, were not able to save their businesses, and they returned to Japan. Also, there were some laws that were very negative against them, especially made against Japanese people. For example, we have a law, the law of immigration of 1936, in which it was forbidden the nationality to the children of immigrants, and in that moment, Japanese, you know, that were born in Peru. So if your child was born in Peru, you know, your parents, the parents of the child were Japanese, and your child was born in Peru, that child was not Peruvian, even though was born here. You know, so it was given the nationality of the country of their parents, right? Also, there was another law from the year 1932 in which in any business, at least 80% of the people working in that business should be Peruvian. And that affected directly the businesses of the Japanese, because most of these Japanese try to employ the people from their country, right, to help each other, right? So these were some of the xenophobic laws that emerged, especially in the context of the Second World War. Mm-hmm. So, well, but we have also some cases of famous Japanese here in Peru. One of the most famous, most people really don't know the face of this gentleman, but they know the stores of this gentleman. Iraoka. When we think in Iraoka, we think in, for example, the televisions, we think in refrigerators, we think in kitchens. This is a sort of like department store specialized in this, we call it white line, which is basically for the kitchens. But this gentleman was originally from Japan, and he married a Peruvian lady. He formed a family here, and now his descendants are some of the most richest Peruvians we have nowadays. So Mr. Iraoka, another person very famous, Joshitaro Amano. He's famous, especially in the world of the culture and museums, because his museum, Museo Amano, is one of the best private collections of archaeology we have here. He has an amazing collection of textiles. It's really a very complete collection. And he was not an archaeologist. He was an enthusiast. He loved archaeology. He loved history. He had the money. He had the resources. So he invested in this. But as well, something unusual in the time when he started to purchase all of these elements, because when you had the money back in the 1940s, 1950s, you purchased the original pieces to the looters, and you used to take it home and maybe taking it out, because it was possible. But no, he decided to create a museum, and he decided to preserve our legacy within this territory and not taking it out. Also, Museum Amano, one of the best ones in terms of archaeology and also a preservation of fabrics, especially. So another one here of Mr. Joshitaro Amano. And well, this is maybe a much more famous picture of a Peruvian Japanese personality. This is the picture of Fujimori, and some of Peruvian people will think he's a hero. Some of the Peruvian people will think he's, let's say, well, what can I say? No, evil, corrupt. So it's almost 50-50. But honestly, in the history of Peru, there is definitely a breaking point after Fujimori. I am not Fujimorista. I am not pro Fujimori, but we cannot neglect that Fujimori is a breaking point in our economy, especially. And also there is an event related with Fujimori, which I think we will explain next. So, well, this is a recreation of the embassy of, the residence of the ambassador of Japan here in Peru, that existed originally in the district of San Isidro, a very well-off district, really beautiful zone. So the residence of the Japanese ambassador used to be there. It looked exactly like the picture you see here. So, well, it was the year 1996. It was December 18. And well, I cannot remember his name in this moment, but the ambassador, he organized a beautiful party to celebrate the birthday of Emperor Akihito of Japan, right? So many people were invited, many people, hundreds actually attended to the party, the creme of the creme of the society of Peru. Even President Fujimori was invited, but he decided not to go. His family went, actually. So in the best moment of the party, when everybody was, like enjoying very much the celebration, a group of 14 terrorists took the house. This was war news. Actually, you can check in the internet, so many documentaries dedicated to the attack of the embassy or the residence of the ambassador of Japan in Peru. And these people belong to the terrorist group, the MRTA. So in Peru, we had two terrorist groups, the Sendero Luminoso, the Shining Path, and the MRTA, Movimiento Revolucionario Tupac Amaru. Both were terrorist groups, but they were not equal. They were different. They had different, ideals. No? But basically, this group, the MRTA, decided to take the residence, and they did this because they wanted the president to pardon and to liberate all of the head leaders of this terrorist group that were in prison. Right? So this was a very clever move by the terrorist group. So they didn't expect it, that this situation, or the hostage, they say, of this, the taking of this residence will last for almost 4 months. So this taking of the residence almost took 4 months to be finished, because they had the government by the neck, right? There were too many people inside the house. The party was invited so many people, this ambassador. So they first decided to release the people that were of not, high rank. And they had no idea that in the group they were releasing the mother of President Fujimori, which back then was President Fujimori in charge, right? It was the times of Fujimori. So he had no idea. Of course, the lady gave, a different name, and she was released. If they had known that, they had the president by the hand, right? But no. So she was released, and then Fujimori took action. And in this long period of time, you might be wondering what Fujimori was doing, what intelligence was doing. Well, actually, they were doing a master plan in which they were caving, they were making tunnels under the house. The way how this house was liberated was by tunnels. And they were working by daytime, and they were putting, you know, like speakers, like very loud outside the house of music. Also, in that way, you know, the terrorists will be distracted. This is an amazing thing. Of course, deserves another story, another lecture, but this is something very important. And that's why also many people consider Fujimori, you know, a very intelligent man, because he was the one that created him and the intelligence also of that time, this plan. Okay, so well, this is just a little bit for homework for you to check later. This is also a picture of the embassy of Peru in Japan, and also the nowadays, let's say, embassy of Japan here in Peru. Look the wall, no, the double fence. So it looks more like a bunker instead of a embassy. and also talking about important Japanese people who had visited Peru, we have Princess Mako, or Meiko, I think it's pronounced in English, this princess of Japan. She visited Peru in the year, it was 2019, no, actually a couple of years ago, and she has a picture. There's a picture of her with former President Biscar, which nowadays is possibly the most hated Peruvian by Peruvians. So well, we have this lady here, and during her visit, she visited many important sites related with the Japanese community here, like for example, the cultural center, the Peruvian Japanese Cultural Center, huge place actually. The money to build this center came part from Japan and also part from the Japanese people here in Peru, that they made a, let's say, they raised money together to make this fantastic facility where we can learn any Japanese art you can imagine, from, I don't know, origami to karate. Also, the idea they have is to, you know, like proliferate in the country all the ideals about the beauty, art of the community. And finally, these are the final pictures. We have also some pictures about the Museum of the Japanese Immigration in Peru, in which we have a picture of the visit of Princess Mako. And we have also some rooms dedicated to the history I just told, the history of the immigration in the first room. We have even the contracts that were signed up by the Japanese who came here back in this first wave of immigration.
It's in Japanese in this case, because
of course
the Chinese ones were in Spanish.
And quite unfair, right? Yeah. Quite unfair, because most of the Chinese had no idea what they were signing up for, or if they were in Chinese, well, many of these Chinese had no education enough to read what they were signing up, right? So thanks, Mari, that's right. Also, the second wave of immigration, in which people were invited by their families, by their relatives, to come to join Peru, because now the relatives that were here in Peru had made some money, you know, they had some wealth, some security, let's say. And also, well, we have the after-war room and the nowadays rooms dedicated to all of the most important Japanese Peruvians we have nowadays. And also notice the word Nikkei community. So what Nikkei means? Well, we cannot confuse Nikkei with Nisei, right? First of all, let me tell you that when we refer to for example, Nikkei, we are talking about the Peruvian Japanese fusion. So Nikkei is the food, for example, right? There are also other elements that are Nikkei. But when we talk about, for example, Nisei, we are talking about the first generation of children of Japanese people born in Peru. So what about the people that came from Japan? They were not born in Peru. They are called Issei. Also, the first group is Issei, then the first born in Peru, Nisei. Then we have the Sansei, we have the Jonsei, and we have the Gosei. And we count up to the fifth. So Maido, this is almost to finish. Maido, one of the top restaurants, Peruvian, Japanese, we have in Peru, given Michelin stars consecutively for long. And well, nowadays closed, of course, because of the pandemic, but such an amazing restaurant.
For many years was considered the best in Latin America.
Exactly. And two representatives in our plates in the Peruvian homes of the fusion of the Japanese culture and the Peruvian culture. We have the tiradito, of course, which Marek is a master making. We have a class in virtual trips of how to make tiradito. And another one that will come soon is the Peruvian Japanese ceviche. Also, the famous Peruvian ceviche transformed into
a twist,
given a twist, a Japanese twist. Yeah. So imagine the Peruvian ceviche with garlic, the ginger and
soy sauce.
Soy sauce, exactly. So that's coming soon, by the way. Okay, so this was a little bit of the Japanese influence in Peru, the Japanese immigration in Peru. And in a moment, I'm going to pass the mic to Marek. Would you like to tell something also, Marek, before we start?
About the Japanese?
No, about what you're going to talk about, the Polish.
No, the Polish immigration was not such big in numbers as the Japanese one, but it was very important for the formation of the identity of Peru. It's a big difference because, first of all, to Peru came Polish people with professionals, because the travel was a very long travel, through the Atlantic, and there were no Panama Channel at this time. I'm talking about the 19th century, so they need to go down through Cape Horn, So the travel was very long, about 3 months. Of course, there were also mass migration of Polish to America, especially to North America, Brazil, and Argentina. But to get to this side, to the Pacific side, they came with contracts. They were not looking for life in this part of the world.
So they were a sponsor.
They were a sponsor, yeah, they were sponsored.
So, and by the way, at the end of this explanation, we will have a round of questions if you would like to make some questions about each one of these, both, the Japanese or the Polish immigration. So we're going to start.
My images.
Okay, so Marek has also put lots of effort in making a really nice slideshow for you. I hope I put them in order. Okay.
Okay, so let's start. This is the flag of Poland, of course, the white eagle. And here in Peru, we have the condor. So the migration from Poland to Peru start really during the colonial time. Jesuits, missionaries, priests that come into evangelizate local population. They go as missionaries. So they start during the colonial period. But it was in the 19th century that those important persons came to Peru. And even is a monument, even is a monument in Lima dedicated to Polish engineers. And this is the only nationality that have a special monument and a park, Parque Polonia. It's very close to the downtown, and it's dedicated to engineers that came to Peru in order to put this country on feet in the middle of the 19th century. The most important one of those engineers was Ernest Malinowski. Ernest Malinowski came to Peru in 1852 with a contract of the Peruvian government. He was an engineer. He was contracted in France because in those days there were no Poland in the map. No, Poland don't exist in the maps of Europe between 1795 and 1918. So during all the 19th century, Poland don't exist as a country. And also it's important that we cannot follow all the Polish that came during those ages, because they didn't came with Polish passports. They came as an Austrians, as a Russians, as a Germans. So we really don't know how many exactly came. But the important ones we remember, and we have the information very clear. He was an engineer that studied in France, and he accepted a proposal of work from Peruvian government in order to develop the railways in Peru. So he came here, he developed the first railway in South America, the railway between Lima and Callao, the main port. It was a short one, about 17, 18 kilometers. But later, gaining the experience, he built the most important one, the most amazing we have in South America, the Trans-Andean Railway, that crossed the Andes. And the highest point of this railway is 4,870 meters high. So higher than Mont Blanc, higher than the highest point of Europe. And starting from ocean level, from the port of Callao. And he reached the highest point at the distance of just 130 kilometers. So imagine the angles that he need to conquer. And there are also more than 6 kilometers of tunnels in the Andes. And everything was made before the invention of the dynamite. Between 1870 and 1879. The original project was to reach the Ucayali River, and through the Ucayali River, the Amazon River, and then the Atlantic, and link in that way both oceans, from the port of Callao to the delta of the Amazon. But we have a war with Chile that started in 1879, and the project don't get finished. So the Peruvian government, we lost that war, so we don't restart this project until the beginning of the 20th century, but there were no any engineer capable to cross another high cordillera. So they continue the railway into the valleys, one direct into the city of Huancayo and the second one to the mines. But this is the one of the engineering miracles of the 19th century. And it was the highest railway on the world until 2005, when Chinese had another one that goes 200 meters higher, but don't start at the sea level. So it's still the highest difference of altitude in the world. So we have here another important Polish, Edward Harvey. Edward Harvey was also an engineer, and he found the first technical school, or Politechnica, we call in Polish, in South America in 1866. And the first professors of that technical school were Polish. So it was the schools for engineers, and the first professors were Polish engineers too. One of there were also naturalists, or now we call biologists, but in those days they were not as a naturalist or ornithologist, that came to the jungle. They go to the jungle and start to study the nature of Peru. One of them was Jan Kalinowski. And here I have three, and I have three species that had their names, Polish names, as the species name. This is an agouti Kalinowski, one of the agoutis, a rodent from the Amazon. Those naturalists came on the second half of the 19th century. And Jan Kalinowski was also very important. He left us a very big legacy because he was very active in the jungle. He had a Peruvian lady, Peruvian spouse, and have 14 kids. 14 kids. Yeah. So Kalinowski is the most popular Polish last name in Peru nowadays. Another is Jelski, Konstantin Jelski. He was an ornithologist and discovered many birds in the north of Peru. One is this one, Tangara of Jelski Tangara. And also Jan Stoltzman, he discovered many species of hummingbirds. So there's hummingbirds with the specific name or scientific name Stolzmanni, no, in Latin, in Latin. And a little bit later, of course, the discovery of the Colca Canyon by Polish expedition. You heard about the Colca Canyon, the deepest canyon in the world, located in the south of Peru. It was discovered or navigated for the first time by a Polish expedition of students of Krakow in 1981. No, it was a group of 6 Polish students that go into the canyon for the first time, and they were there for 33 days. No, they were 100 kilometers, totally disconnected of the world. When they came out, the newspapers from Peru informed that the Polish expedition lost 1 guy. Before, all of them together lost 80 kilos during that month in the deepest canyon of the earth. And they measure and establish almost very, very precise the deepest of the canyon in 3,418 meters. So the difference later with all the technology is less than 2 meters. And also we have a Polish archaeologist, very important, very active. I'm talking nowadays. Krzysztof Makowski is the director of the School of Archaeology in one of the most important universities of Lima, and he discovered many sites inside Pachacamac. Now we have a tour in Pachacamac, virtual trips. Now we cannot run it because the place is closed. In the last year, or in 2019, it was not in the last year, a discovery by Polish archaeologists Miłosz Gierz and Patrycja Przątka. Castillo de Guarmey, it was a cemetery like 300 kilometers north of Peru in the coast that belongs to the period between Wari and Moche culture, and demonstrates the influence of Wari in the coast of Peru. It was a big exhibition that goes around the world. Maucallacta was the capital of the Incas in the region of Arequipa, in the Conti-Suyo, in the west side. No? It was discovered also by Polish archaeologist Mariusz Żółkowski, and they still work now, not in this year, not in the last year, but there are works there. There are many works here in different archaeological places that are directed by Polish archaeologists. Those 3 are one of the most important in this moment. And also talking Polish Peruvian, we can mention this lady, Maria Rostworowski. Maria Rostworowski is half Polish and half Peruvian. He was a historian, no, self-taught, that write a lot of books related with pre-Columbian society and the history of the Incas. And we have nowadays a group, an association for the Polish community we call Dom Polski, no, the Polish house. The Polish house, we have meetings, no, not of course in the last 2 years. This is but we have meetings, various festivities like Christmas, Polish Independence, Day of Constitution, and of course also Peruvian festivities, because this is a community for Polish and Peruvians. Because if it's only for Polish, it was too short, you know, the amount of people that integrate the community. Now counting Polish Peruvian marriages and the descendants of Polish, so the community in all Peru is reaching about 1,000 people. It's nothing. For example, the descendants of the Germans in Peru are more than 200,000. You know, the descendants of the Italians in Peru is more than 500,000. So it's one of the smallest really communities in Peru, and one, of course, of the smallest Polish community abroad. My mom.
It's not quantity, it's quality.
My mom works in the Polish embassy in Lima, and the Polish embassy in Peru is also for Polish people of Ecuador and Bolivia. It works for 3 countries. And she had the information how many Polish lives in those 3 countries, like 500 persons, you know? half of them in Peru, and the rest between Ecuador and Bolivia. And the half of those Peruvians are missionaries that live deep in the jungle or high in the mountains, far away from the civilization. You know? So that's so we are continue exploring. So the Polish community, the Polish history in Peru is very interesting and is more related with, of course, engineer, natural science, and discoveries, archaeology. You know, that's the way it's orientated. And that's the way also how the people in Peru recognize us as adventurous guys.
You are adventurous indeed. So, well, we hope you enjoy this. First of all, our selection of information and images of today, and well, we are very passionate about, well, these immigrations, because Peruvians, we are the children of the immigration. There's no one here in Peru, unless you go to the deep forest, maybe, or to the highest mountains, that can say, I am truly indigenous. I am just, the children of the Incas. No, we all Peruvians are the children of the mixing of bloods, of we are the product of sometimes even forced marriages, right? Because sometimes, well, when the Spaniards came, for example, they took the indigenous women. Well, they were not asking for permit to do that, but we are the children, the product of that. And we are with, well, a better understanding, more culture, reading also, we are now able to embrace our colors, no, and our origins, no, and be in peace of that, and also celebrate that. So and you cannot celebrate something you don't know. So that's also the reason of these sessions. We hope you enjoy them, both explanations, and if you have a question, please just drop it, no problems.
I just wanted to say that you need more Kalinowskis then to grow the book.
This is the more we need more.
But I had a question about the Japanese. Where the Japanese that were sort of taken away their privileges and etc. and citizenship, were they ever compensated later on, or do you know?
No, and sometimes we tend to just pass the page and not talk about certain things, and many countries do that when they make mistakes, and Peru is not different in that term, but they are also now like historians, let's say people that are in this in the what is this, reporters, no, writers that are starting to recollect some elements that are important to never forget, for this never happen again. And for example, the picture about the sacking of the businesses, that was an article from a newspaper, El Comercio, which is one of the most important newspapers in Peru, fully dedicated to the awful events of 1940. So these are chapters of our history that sometimes it's better to forget for some people, but I don't think that way. We tour guys are a problem, because especially we dig in, the scandalous things and elements that are important to never forget, to be forgotten.
But they integrate in the society very well. Yeah. When I was in school, I have friends of Japanese ascendants, and there are one more of the groups of
yes, I think it's sort of like well, Japanese people were the type of people that were trying to close the doors of their houses as a way of protection, like everything that happened in the community stay in the community, and sometimes for good purpose, no, because if there was a problem with someone of the community, the community will support, will help, would even lend money. But eventually, well, these traditions started to come to an end around the 60s and 70s, where people started to marry Peruvians, Peruvian women, Peruvian men, and well, you have to open, right? Eventually, it comes to an end, and now the community is very well integrated. It's definitely very well integrated, and now that's the moment. This is the moment when we are seeing more the fusion cuisine, for example.
Yeah, the fusion Japanese cuisine is something new. When I was a child, it wasn't exist. This is a new thing. The Japanese Peruvian cuisine, for example, in the last 20 years.
When the food starts to integrate, that means that you are integrated already in society.